All right. I am so excited to welcome back to the Propelify stage Andrew Yang. He joined us in 2017 when he was just getting his campaign started. There were a few people who were like, who's this guy? And now there's not very many people who are wondering, who's this guy? Former presidential candidate. He's an entrepreneur. He's the founder of Humanity Forward. Andrew, thank you so much for being here at Propelify again this year.
It's great to be here, Aaron. I remember 2017 well. Andrew Yang's nascent campaign showing up in New Jersey. But yeah, it's great to be here and love the work you do. Propelify, United, everything that's helping push the country in a better direction, I'm all for. Just scratching the surface of what technology could do. And I know, and today's event is really to me like such a powerful emblem of where we could be going because right now just that there isn't enough in the way of investment or market opportunity for a lot of the technologies that would solve problems that affect us all. There's a lot of investment capital flowing towards things that might make groceries getting to your door a little bit easier, which is important. I mean, we all need groceries, but the things around climate or massive uh, planet-wide problems, we're really underinvesting.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I want to get back to that in a moment. But I want to start a little bit on the story that's evolved with you since you've been on the stage of Propelify a few years ago. You were just getting started in the New York region at the time. And, now you've been on the national stage in a large capacity. What are some of the things surprising ways that your life has changed?
It's sort of um, hard to believe given that I ran for president, but I'm actually staggered by the fact that now so many people do know who I am. It's like it's sort of strange as an entrepreneur being like, I want to run for president, and be like, oh wow, it sort of worked in the sense that now. Like get recognized on the street, or people want selfies and whatnot. So that's like the biggest change that, for some reason, I had not really anticipated because I was running to solve the problems, and it was less about me really. I thought really it's like the ideas that were the most important thing around automation and a human-centered economy. So I've actually been kind of surprised by the fact that I am now a recognized figure in various ways. I was more used to being kind of anonymous, like when I showed up, like in 2017. So that's been a pretty big change.
I mean, in many ways, the candidacy was its own startup, right? And often a lot of people look at a startup and say, that's crazy that I'll never work. You got a lot of traction. I know a lot of people who thought you really had a very, very serious opportunity to win in a way that they did not think so. That you changed their mind is what I want to highlight there. That they thought what started as there's no way turned into, wow, this really might take off. What's a lesson for entrepreneurs who are working on businesses like that, where people are saying there's no way that's ever going to happen, that they actually can stay focused and grow and be determined to make an impact?
It really was a startup, and like many startups, people were exactly flocking to it in the early days, and people weren't like, yeah, I mean, that's true. Any startup I've been involved with, like, people are dubious at first. But as you make progress and more people get on board, then you can accomplish amazing things. To me, the reason why I was eager to run was that I was convinced that we need a different approach. And I thought, well, if I feel that way, there must be other Americans that feel the way. And once I got past a certain point and a certain degree of critical mass, and thank you to everyone who supported my campaign, we ended up raising tens of millions of dollars, more than many establishment candidates, and we're able to contend at the highest levels. Learned a lot, still, and like a true entrepreneur or startup person, I'm just like, okay, like if I had to do this again, like what would I do differently? Because you have a better sense of the variables when you get to market, and it really was a startup, and it had so many parallels because there's so many people that joined our little team before it took off, and it felt like a startup every day.
I mean, I don't want to get too much into the campaign, but I wonder if there's anything top of mind when you say, looking backwards, always very easy. What would I have done differently? Is there anything top of mind you say, I wish we just did this differently earlier, or anything like that?
I'm really proud of so much of what we accomplished. But there's one major variable I underestimated. It was the degree of influence that approximately 200, primarily DC based political journalists have, where I spent very little time trying to uh, introduce myself to them until we were in the midst of the campaign. And those folks prize familiarity, shall we say. So like they like ran into some institutional resistance that I might have been able to reduce if I'd gone after it earlier. But at the same time, I don't really beat myself up over it, because if I tried to show up before the fact, they probably would have, I'm not sure they would have taken me seriously anyway.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, do you think that for startups, if they're thinking about exposure and press, that there's a parallel that they should make sure that they have some of those relationships early on? Or do you think that they get attention when it's, more widely available and known?
From what I've seen in the startup world, press is like a double-edged sword, and you're better served by focusing on the business and the offering, and making customers happy, and then growing into press, than to try and use press to drive your business. That's at least been my experience.
Yeah, I guess different in your case where, recognition and getting the headlines was critical to that is the part of the path.
And that was a big adjustment, really, because I used to joke with my team that you would be a terrible CEO if all you did was like run after TV cameras every day. Like your company's probably going to into a ditch. Like if your leader is just like, what can you book me on today? But then when you're running for office, that the press and publicity actually ended up being a key value driver. And so that was a massive adjustment for me, because I ran an education company where you just needed to do good work every day. If you did that, then you grew, and if you didn't, then you didn't grow. And people don't make buying decisions based on press very often. They make buying decisions based upon who they think can provide a better service.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, I want to come back to the entrepreneurship piece in just one second, but do you think that the person with the most headlines wins politically, or does it matter what's underneath the headline?
Well, politically, there are some awesome people that you never heard of. Like I've met them, and I'm like, "You're awesome," but then like they they went nowhere because they didn't have millions and millions of dollars behind them, and didn't have the ability to generate it. So there is something perverse about what's going on with our political system, where the money is talking louder than personal qualities in many cases. It's not a true meritocracy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I have a lot more questions there, but as you know, today's Propelify focuses around a better planet, and so how the startup community can make an impact where we started. So I'm wondering what you think the role is of entrepreneurs in a clean energy future, not just for the industry, but for society overall.
Again, we're underinvested by orders of magnitude in a clean energy future. I'm really grateful to folks like Ralph and PSEG who are going to change that by saying, look, let's actually just put some money up. So you and I both know entrepreneurs and investors. The investors are just trying to make more money for their limited partners, and that makes sense. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the financial payoff for trying to clean up our emissions, trying to make our planet more habitable? And right now, those market returns are uneven. They're all over the map. There are certain segments where you could say, look, if I'm going to reduce your energy bills, then maybe I can make some money off it. But we need to do a better job of having a true market set of rewards for entrepreneurs who are actually trying to solve these problems. It's one reason why I was for a carbon tax when I ran, is because if you could say to companies, look, I'm going to like reduce your carbon emissions, and it's going to save this much money, then you'd have more innovation, more energy going to it. And that to me is something that government should be trying to do, is trying to make it so that our entrepreneurs can do the most important innovation work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, regardless of the outcome of this election, what can we all do to work towards a clean energy future?
No, this is one of the reasons I ran, Aaron, is that certainly if you're the CEO of a major utility like PSEG, that like there's stuff you can do. For the rest of us, there's this sinking feeling where you're like, I have the feeling if I recycle a little bit extra, like it's just not going to do the trick, like you
Yeah.
feel like the delta's so enormous. We need to start facing facts about the fact that we're decades behind the curve and need to invest tens, hundreds, billions of dollars to try and meaningfully adapt. And for individuals, right now, I genuinely think the main thing we can do is try and reward businesses that are investing in a clean energy future, and rewarding politicians who take it seriously and have it one of their key issues, because we're talking about a global $1 trillion problem. And so saying to someone like, look, it's compost and recycle, which I'm for, these things are great. It's like
It's not enough.
but it's not enough. We just have to be realistic about the scale and magnitude of the problem. And our government's just been very, very bad at addressing long-term problems. And this one's obviously the biggest of them.
I mean, the question started with regardless of the outcome of the election, but do you think that, like, can the solution exist regardless of the outcome of the election, or do you think it substantially matters what happens from a federal perspective that will drive these results?
On climate change, the election is crucial, and there's just no way around it. And even if we do, everyone knows I've endorsed Joe and Kamala, and you know want them to win very, very badly. But the reality is, even if this election goes that direction, we still have so much work to do, so much catching up to do, and we need global collaboration. The United States of America is approximately 15% of global emissions, and we're way behind the curve. So to me, the election is key, but the election has to just be the beginning.
Yeah. Um, Knowing that the policy makes such a big difference, though, I think one thing that's different for me is I've been involved in startups where they're primarily SaaS companies of some kind, a software as a service company, and the resources required to get started are not enormous. Getting into the clean energy space, sometimes you do need deep pockets and resources to make them work.
Yep.
So where do you think the opportunity is for entrepreneurs here, and how can they get involved? Or must we get more PSEGs writing checks to make this work?
Right now, there are still opportunities around just helping people and companies and organizations save money. So if you can do that, then you have billions of dollars of opportunity ahead of you, because money talks, and everyone's like, "What? You can save on my energy? You can help me save on my energy bill? You can, help me save on my heating oil, my gas, like whatever it is." So there are massive opportunities in those directions. I think there are going to be a lot of companies that do a bit of both, honestly. Even if you look at the granddaddy of them all, Tesla. I mean, Tesla had significant government support early on, and that there are subsidies that make it so that electric cars are more cost competitive. So if you can save people money, there's a massive opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, how can big companies contribute, though, towards a clean energy future?
Big companies can make a huge difference just by changing their own practices. One thing that I'm passionate about is reducing packaging waste. It's like we all get these crazy freaking boxes and packages, and you're like, you know what? Like, I'm not sure you really needed to do quite as much around this product. I might have been okay if you just sent me the product. So there are practices that big companies can change that would make a huge difference in terms of their carbon footprint, and their employees would love it. Their employees would look up and say, "Oh wow, company really takes this seriously. It's putting its money where its mouth is," and it will pay off on the bottom line over time. But I think it'll pay huge dividends immediately in terms of both employee and customer recognition that you're walking the walk.
Yeah. What startups do you see are good examples of, like, what you just talked about, human-centered capital?
Well, human-centered capitalism is something where you prioritize our health, mental health, environmental sustainability, affordability, things like that, as opposed to just return on investment, stock market returns, GDP. GDP is a terrible measurement that cures a lot, and even the inventors, this is a terrible measurement of national well-being. and we're using it almost 100 years later, saying, "Look, it's going up." It's like, yeah, that's really the point. Particularly now, when quality of life and return on capital are heading in opposite directions, really. So if you ask me about a company that people would know that's a positive role model towards treating its people well, you and I both know Che Huang of Boxed. I mean, they're doing great work where they're investing a lot in their people, a lot in the families that work for them. They don't have to. They're the type of business where, you could just like pay people market or market plus one and say like, yeah, we're fine.
Yeah.
but but they're actually investing in their people. The problem right now is that companies management teams are not rewarded for investing in their people in the same way they are investing in efficiencies and automation.
Yeah, I mean, and to just to share a little bit more about what Jay's doing with Box. I mean, I don't know if all these policies are still in place, but for a while they were paying for college. I think a portion of your kids' college if you work there, your wedding. They're very focused on how to invest in their people to make sure that they were happy, productive, and could do well. Jay talks about how his parents struggled making a living wage, and he wanted to make sure that his employees were never put in that position. And so yeah, I'm with you on that. And obviously, they have a major presence here in New Jersey, but regardless, really, really excited about the kind of work that they're doing.
Yeah, look at that Jersey shout out. I knew he was
Look
part
at
of the Propelify general crew.
he that's his
He and I,
official title, part of Propelify General Crew with a big
yeah,
warehouse in Milburn or Springfield, but you pass
yeah.
it on 78 all the time. Um, we're talking about this, the impact of the workforce and the Clean Tech Impact Challenge, where you're a judge. We're one of the main tentpoles of that challenge is looking at the impact in the future of work that these organizations are making. Because, for instance, smart metering displaces thousands of jobs of people who make a good income walking door to door reading the meters. But obviously, as technology people, like that's not the most efficient solution. So we looked at, and that's just one example, but how these technology companies potentially disrupt the workforce. So if you're thinking about the workforce, if you had a crystal ball to look, what does a workforce look like in 5, 10, or 20 years? You've had some big ideas. You have some big ideas on how to enable and empower individuals in the workforce. What do you imagine it looks like? And maybe a curveball of what do you think it really looks like, and what do you wish it would look like?
Those are two different things. So, what do
Unfortunately.
we all see is happening around us right now? You see the pandemic accelerating remote work and investment in software and AI and automation and aisle cleaning robots and the rest of it. So you're seeing an increased stratification. There's like a dumbbell economy where you have like the cluster of people at the top and then a shrinking middle class, and then a cluster of people at the bottom. That's enormous. It's not even a cluster. It's like it's like like a giant end of the dumbbell. It's a very asymmetrical dumbbell, more or less. And the future of work looks similar, unless we invest in making it more broad-based and accessible and equitable. And it's similar to what's happening with clean energy. So here's an example. Let's say that you have a massive need for people to take care of the elderly, or people to educate children, or people to help make people mentally stronger or deal with substance abuse. Let's say those three things are true. They are true. I mean, you can look around and be like, oh, yeah, we actually do have massive pressing needs. What are the investment levels into each of those areas, or infrastructure, which is very relevant to what we're talking about with clean energy? So you have massive needs in those areas that could conceivably employ hundreds of thousands of Americans, even millions of Americans, depending upon how you structured it. But right now, the economic returns aren't being channeled in those directions. And so we're looking around saying, oh, we need jobs. Oh, we have massive needs in infrastructure and education and health and elder care and everything else. So we all can see that the ideal would be that we marry those two things, and we actually create hundreds of thousands of jobs in uh, modernizing our infrastructure, or hundreds of thousands of jobs in educating our children. And that is the big challenge of this time, is whether we're going to actually create the necessary marketplaces in these directions. And I will say this as someone who's like you, Aaron, because you opened with this. I've been a scrappy entrepreneur, and the last thing a scrappy entrepreneur generally is like, hey, I need someone to create a marketplace for me in this area. Like we just do our thing. We figure out like what opportunities exist. We like build an organization to meet those needs or challenges. Um, and both things can be true. It's like we need people to create organizations and offerings that meet existing needs, and we need to channel additional resources towards some of the bigger challenges if we're going to create a jobs oriented future that at all resembles what we'd want.
You bring up a really good point. I sort of stumbled into the New Jersey tech community. I was a lonely entrepreneur trying to build my businesses, had some big success, had a bunch that went nowhere, and found this community in what was originally the New Jersey Tech Meetup and then Propelify, and now with Tech United overall. But it's pushed my thinking on the role of government in building a company. And to your point, right? I was never paying attention to any of these plans. I was just, here's a problem, here's my solution. I'm going to work my ass off to see if I can get some traction on this thing. And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. But I wonder how, has your experience as being an entrepreneur changed your thinking on the role of government in helping some of these businesses get started or grow? Like, what do you think that dynamic is, the right dynamic?
That's why I ran for president, is that I saw that we needed to create markets for innovation and jobs in areas that would actually move us in a better direction. And that I think is the government's ideal role, where I mentioned before a carbon tax. It's like you put a tax on carbon, then all of a sudden every company is like, what are our emissions? What's going on? And then every entrepreneur is like, I can help you with that. So that's the kind of role that government can take on, where it creates incentives and markets and then lets innovators have at it. I'm also not someone who is opposed to the government actually just plowing resources into a particular challenge. That there's like, and again, I have very, very healthy respect for market dynamics. But the reality is, occasionally, you're looking at a problem where the government can be like, you know what, we actually need to put billions of dollars into AI research or guardrails for AI. We need to put billions of dollars into clean tech research and development or subsidies. These are not things where you can just sit back and say, well, we'll let investors figure it out, because in some of these areas, the incentives just aren't as high as you'd want them to be. So I think that's the ideal role of government, is to create frameworks, incentives, marketplaces, and occasionally make bets. And I don't think we should be beating up the government being like, oh, you messed that up, because the reality is, and you and I know this, like venture capitalists strike out on their investments like 70% of the time, and no one's yelling at them.
You just get that one right, it makes a big difference.
Yes, like the government has occasionally made an investment that has improved our way of life, and
That's
you
right.
don't expect it to happen every single time, but like let them freaking make some bets.
Yeah. Yeah. The you've I've heard you say this many times, but I still hear so many people talk about UBI and say something like, well, what's the incentive to go back to work, and why does that really make a difference? And I'm frequently telling them, so the message I heard from you, but I would love for those who are unaware, even if they don't agree with it, or if you still want a chance to try to win them over, but can you explain the impact of giving people a basic income and where you've seen statistically the improvements it can make in people's lives?
Well, right now we're still struggling with job loss of in excess of 11 million from the pandemic. So right now, as we're speaking, 55% of Americans think we should have a universal basic income in perpetuity, and 75% of Americans think we should have a cash relief during the pandemic, which we know will stretch on for months and months. So this is common sense, because we can look around to see that the bartenders and airline attendants and security guards and hairstylists and personal trainers, like, they all got sent home, and how are they going to survive? Like you're looking at mass eviction crises and a lot of other very, very disastrous things, and it's no one's fault. Like I drove by a gym that was closed the other day. It's like, is it the gym owner's fault that we're not going to the gym? Like, of
Yeah.
course not. I wish we were going to the gym on multiple levels. So in this day and age, you have to look around and say, okay, what's realistic, and putting money into people's hands is now something that is common sense. And the question is, how do we actually distribute these resources in a way that actually puts people in position to work, to live, to do things that will be positive? And it's been very consistent that when people get money into their hands, only two groups work at lower levels: new moms who spend more time with their kids, and teenagers who finish school at higher levels. I mean, no one's mad at those two groups. But for everyone else, you're seeing the same work levels or higher in some cases, and higher levels of health, mental health, public trust, in some cases, entrepreneurship. Because if you put money into people's hands, it's like a foundation, and then they go into like a lot of the money just goes right back into the community anyway.
Yeah. Over the course of obviously the pandemic and some of the relief provided, I have heard people say things like, well, what's the incentive to go back to work if they're now getting more money from the subsidy or the relief program than they were making at their job? And I know that the stats show that people are still hungry for work, but the logic didn't seem right. Like, the why are the people still why are still people still seeking work even if they're getting income from the government that exceeded what they were making before? And I wonder what your reasoning is for why people are doing that.
The logic is reversed in that particular case because the benefits people are talking about are actually tied to our current unemployment system, which means if you went back to work, you would lose the benefits. So imagine a world where you were actually getting a certain amount of money, and if you went back to work part time because they can't hire you back full time, but they have a bit of a demand, you get that money and what your employer is paying you. Right now, we're taking the money away if you show up to work, and so our current system does have backwards where we're actually going to take the money away from you if you do go back to work. It's one reason why these unconditional cash grants are a better approach. But we're restricted somewhat by the current nature of our bureaucracy, where right now our bureaucracy says apply for unemployment benefits, we'll give you these benefits, and then if you go back to work, then you get less. Which it's not what families want, it's not what employers want, it's not what anyone wants. It's one reason why we have to modernize our government.
So we're getting close to the end of time here, but I'm hoping we can end with a message of hope, right? We're in a very nasty political environment. Um, it feels to me, I don't know if it feels like this for everyone around our age, around these times in history, but it certainly feels like the most consequential election in a long time. But what are you seeing in traveling the country and talking to people around the country as a potential message of hope? Are there communities working together? Are there more positive things happening than maybe some of the headlines suggest? Any messages of hope that you could share?
I was invigorated by meeting thousands, tens of thousands of Americans on the trail over the last couple of years. They inspired me to the extent that there's hope. Uh, there's this newfound recognition that we're going to have to start doing things differently moving forward, that incremental baby steps are not going to do the trick. And the goal really is to make it so that some of the changes that we see are massive positive changes as opposed to the current degradation or deterioration. There is this appetite that is built up. We're in an historic time where things that have been inconceivable, and I'll use myself as an example, uh, total anonymous newcomer went on to contend for the presidency. Universal basic income went from something like 25% approval rating when I started to 55% now. So the appetite for big positive changes and more modern approaches is sky high. And the question is whether we're going to actually get some of these policies across the finish line. But I can tell you affirmatively that the odds of big positive changes have shot up over the last number of weeks because millions of are looking up and saying we need to do things that are bigger and better than the way we've been doing them in the past.
And the last question, the theme of this event is building a better future for all, which was something that we've been thinking about as a mission for Tech United New Jersey long before the pandemic and some of these other social issues became more prominent. But what would be your charge to the tech community for someone watching? What could they do as an individual to help us build a better future for everyone?
I love entrepreneurs and techies and folks who are working on innovation in New Jersey in particular, but really anywhere. And there's so much that you can do because we need your energy and leadership and guts and courage more than ever right now. Like you all illustrate what's possible. The average American is not in position right now to become an entrepreneur. I mean, that's just a tough truth. And I'm an entrepreneur. like you're an entrepreneur, people watching this, we need more folks like you just to demonstrate what's possible out there. Like if you make good things happen for your firm, for your organization, you even just keep someone on payroll or expand a little bit, that is enormous. I have been the head of a company. I know how meaningful that work is. We just need to take what you're doing, add to it, and then multiply it and enhance and augment it to the extent possible. That's not easy because it's very hard to clone you folks. There's only one in price. But to the extent that we can create an environment where there are more of you, that to me is the answer. I spent years doing that work, still doing that work today. I just want to try and make it so that more people can activate their own potential. And it's entrepreneurs that have actually realized your potential and continue to realize it every day. Because I know if you're a person, you look up, and no matter how successful you are, you're like, oh, like I need to do better. Like the company can be doing better, et cetera, et cetera. Or if your company's struggling right now, which I know many are, you have to make tough decisions. But it's that general problem-solving approach and attitude that you can get better. That is what we need in this country right now. It's been lost to millions of Americans, tens of millions. I was struck by it myself on the trail, Aaron, where like I'm an entrepreneur who's hung out with a lot of other entrepreneurs, and you get to a lot of the country, and they're like, like they're looking at you like you're shedding light on the fact that great things are still possible, and they need that. Like they need to get their heads up and see that we can still do great things, build new things, solve real problems.
Yeah, they sure do. Well, we are out of time on this discussion, but I really, really genuinely appreciate it. It's great to have you back on stage, even if just virtual. Hopefully next year in person, we can welcome you once again across the river. But really appreciate your message. Where you are obviously driven by math. How's your confidence level right now in the Biden campaign? We're about a month out.
The math looks good.
Yeah.
It's a solid, steady margin. I'll be counting on the debates. The debates are a big variable. But if the election is held today, and people are voting right now, so if you haven't voted, register, get your mail-in ballot, and the rest of it. But the math looks positive for Joe and Kamala. And there are going to be a bunch of people hopefully getting together in Washington to try and ramp up solutions. I may be one of them, and if so, I might be recruiting. So, hopefully we can try and get some of the awesome entrepreneurs of New Jersey on board with a nation rebuilding effort.
We would love to see that happen. We'd love to be part of the effort to bring some of that talent into the White House should that unfold. So I'm sure we'll be in touch again. Thank you so much again for being with us. Normally, if we were in person, I'd get everybody to stand up and we'd high five our neighbor. Unfortunately, right now we have to do it digitally. So on the count of three, we'll high five. 1, 2, 3. Boom.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. That's a solid high five. Andrew Yang, everybody, if you're still here, we've got the finals coming up later this afternoon on the Clean Tech Impact Challenge, a bunch more keynotes and so much more. Stick around. Andrew Yang.
Thank you, everyone. Let's go get them. Let's show what we can do.